This is The Roadshow, and I'm your host, David Warren. Today is Therapy Day with our friend Kimberly Haar, a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. Today is also the day when Kim tells her personal, harrowing story of grief, loss, and trauma, as detailed in her new book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. Our desire is that you will find hope, help, and healing as you listen today. Welcome back, Kim.
Hi, David. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we typically start our times together with a light-hearted story from the Haar household, but today will be different, very different. We're going to roll the clock back to the year 2017. It's a story that happened to you.
That's right.
That you have never shared on the Oasis Radio Network until today, because you tell your story in your new book, which we will dive into here in just a bit. But back in 2017, your last name was not Haar. You had been divorced for 4 years, and you were dating once again.
I was.
So let's take you back to 2017. What was life like?
Okay. Well, let me go even a little bit further back, because in 2013, I got divorced after I had been married for 23 years. And I am a strong believer in working your marriage and getting all the help you can. And I am not, even in my professional counseling, I don't say I'm a divorce counselor, because I think when you've got two people that are willing to make things work, you can make most things work. But I had lived through many years of my ex-husband being unfaithful to me. And I had forgiven time and time again. We had 4 children, and I decided in 2013 that I had had enough, and I made the decision that it was time to divorce. So at the time, I also made the decision to stay single for 4 years until all of my children were grown, out of the house. And so 2017, I woke up in the morning and I felt the Lord impressing on my heart that I was going to be married again that year. And so 2017 began the exciting adventure. I was 50 years old. And the scary adventure of dating. And
you and I had already been hosting together here on the Roadshow.
We had been.
And so behind the scenes, you would tell me some really fun dating stories.
I did. In fact, I was looking through some of our old messages, and you would give me, I think one of them, you said, okay, don't snort when you laugh. Don't do this. And so, yes, you were there with me.
I was looking out for my friend.
You were my wingman.
Well, I was especially rooting for you after what took place.
Yes.
Not too long after you, I guess, found somebody that you liked to date.
I did. On April 1, April Fool's Day, I found it was my 14th first date. And I tell you, dating online, I met him online. Dating online is not for the weak of heart. And so I had already decided this was going to be my last first date. And I met a man on April Fool's Day, and we knew almost immediately that there was such a connection, and I knew this was the person I wanted to marry.
And that is the person you did marry.
It is the person I did marry. And the funny thing is, he's an engineer, and after 2 weeks, he told me he had asked Google how long you need to know somebody before you know you're in love. And that's kind of like the engineer brain. And I asked him, I was like, well, what did Google say? And I think it was something like, 6 months. And I said, well, ask Siri. It was, I didn't like that answer. So he told me he wanted to marry me. And that was after like 2 weeks.
And everybody knows his name is Andrew Haar.
It is.
Thus Kimberly Haar, the name on your brand new book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. Of course, I call you Kim because I have since
That's right, since we were in high school.
Okay, so it's 2017. You're hosting the Roadshow from time to time. You have a practice, a therapy practice.
Right.
And also you are dating 14 first dates, but number 14 was the winner.
He was the winner.
All right. So you had been going out. He'd been asking Google and Siri, how soon can I marry this fabulous woman? Which I could have told him how fabulous you were. Just do it, Andrew. Do it. Go for it. But here's where life took a turn.
Yes. I had dated Andrew for 4 weeks, and we knew we were getting serious. And one evening, my ex-husband had invited me to come to his apartment because we'd had a friendly divorce. We often talked about our children. And I went there, and he was asking me questions about, me dating again. And Andrew was really the first man I had seriously dated. And I knew that my ex-husband didn't like that idea.
Was he wanting to get back together with you?
Well, he wanted me to give him another opportunity for me to date him again. And maybe if it was before Andrew, I don't know what I would have said or done, but I knew that Andrew was the person for me. And so I said no. And I said, you just need to move on. You need to move on because I am. And when I left his apartment that evening, I had an uneasy feeling inside me. It was just an odd, kind of like a gnawing feeling. And I went, and he had told me, he said, maybe I'm just going to need to go talk to this new man you've been dating. And I thought, oh my goodness, he's going to make a fool of himself. He's going to spread some rumors about me, or he's just, I don't know what he was going to do. So I called Andrew when I left my ex-husband's home, and I said, can I stop by and see you for a minute? And so it was like 9 o'clock at night, and I went to Andrew's home, and I asked him, I kind of warned him. I said, I don't know what my ex-husband will say or do, but I'm sorry. I knew it was probably just going to be embarrassing. And I asked Andrew, I said, would you fight for me? And Andrew looked at me and he said, of course I would. And I said, why would you fight for me? How do you know you would fight for me? And he said, because you're worth it. And those would be the last words that I spoke to Andrew for some time, because not only was he going to have to fight for me, he was going to have to fight for his own life. Okay.
So you went home.
I went home, and I was getting in bed. And
you lived alone.
I'd lived alone. I was
empty nester.
Empty nester, 50 years old. And something inside me, just a gnawing knowing, said, lock your bedroom door. So I didn't question it. I wasn't scared. Nothing was going on. But I got up and I locked my bedroom door. And then I went back to bed and I fell asleep. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door crashing down off the hinges. And I woke up to some angry screaming. And I was looking into the face of my ex-husband, who he was intoxicated. And I want to say, when we were married, there was not alcohol in our home. So this was a surprise to me. He broke down my door, was intoxicated. And the first words he told me is he had just come from killing my parents. And now let me just say, he had not killed my parents, but I did not know that. And so that began 4 hours of, I was assaulted. There was some bullets involved. There was holes in my wall. I was assaulted, and then I was kidnapped, and he told me as punishment for ruining his life, I was going to have to watch him murder Andrew. And I was not aware he had actually been stalking me for some time, so he knew where Andrew lived. And something that he said to me was, you should be glad you weren't at his home at 11 o'clock last night when I came, because I drove by, and I saw that at 9 o'clock he had driven by and seen I was there. He drove back by at 11 o'clock at night. And he said, you should be glad you weren't there, because I was going to come in and I was going to kill both of you.
4 hours this took place.
Yes. I was assaulted for 4 hours.
I've got to say that you showed me a picture that, where did they take that, at the police station?
No, actually, I sent you the picture the same day it happened. I sent it to you from I was in the emergency room, and I took that picture. And I took it because something inside me, I knew I wanted to document what was happening to me. It was just kind of like an instant decision. I took 2 pictures and put my phone away, and, the evening progressed.
Well, I can just attest to the fact that he used very strong force on you, and I'm sure it wasn't just on your face and head.
Sure. Well, I think the picture I sent you, there was, he had a gun, and he hit my head, and at one point I actually got the gun and I hit his head. So there was a struggle, and but the picture I sent you, my face was pretty unrecognizable.
Okay, so what happened next?
Well, when I knew, it was like, I'll say that God gave me a gift of calm. It didn't mean I was never afraid, but there was a gift of calm even when he had said, I've just come from killing your parents. My first thought was, okay, put that on the shelf. You can grieve that later because there's nothing you can do right now. And I prayed and said, Lord, keep me alive because my children are going to need me. And I instructed myself, just pay attention to all of his words. Don't freak out. Don't, panic. Just do what he says. And so during that time, it was, there was one point where I was laying on my bed and David, I felt the presence of God in the room. And it was a sad presence, but I knew it was a presence. It was a familiar presence.
Did you sense that you would live through this?
I did not know. Because my ex-husband was intoxicated. I didn't know what his plans were. And obviously it's a scary situation to be in. But when I sensed that presence in the room that I knew was the presence of God, in that moment, fear left me. And I remember telling myself, you know what, if I die, I will not have died alone. And it was like the presence of God just wrapped itself around me, and it was like God was holding my hand. And from that point, there was not fear.
All right. For those just turning their radios on, this is a true story that happened to our very own Kim Haar back in 2017. She has never told this story on the air until now because it ties in with her brand new book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. And we're calling her Kimberly Haar because that's the name on the book. Okay, so this was a 4-hour ordeal. Mm-hmm. The gun was shot. The bullets were shot.
Right.
Holes in your walls. Mm-hmm. You didn't know if he was going to shoot you.
That's correct. I had a gun in my mouth. There was a struggle, I couldn't breathe. Oftentimes I got lightheaded and I thought I was going to pass out. But even through all that, my prayer was, okay, Lord, just keep me alive. Just keep me alive.
Okay. Now, somehow your ex-husband made his way over to the man
That's right.
whom you were dating.
Mm-hmm.
And to whom you are now married.
That's right. He kidnapped me. And he said that I would have to go with him and I would have to witness him shooting Andrew. And so he walked behind me and we went into the truck that he had come in and we drove the 10 or 12 miles to Andrew's house. And that whole time, I was praying for Andrew. I was praying angels protecting, I was like, Lord, just put the angels around him to protect him. I was praying he'd go to work early that morning because by this time it was between 6 and 6:30 in the morning. And as we were driving, I was kind of thinking, how am I going to get away? What am I going to do? But there were no other cars in sight. So the idea of, jumping out and getting a car to help me, there was no help. So we drove up and we arrived at Andrew's house. And my ex-husband looked at me and he said, now you can go do whatever you need to do. And he had left the keys in the ignition. And so I watched as he took 3 steps up. He took some extra bullets and he grabbed another gun from the backseat of the vehicle. And I watched him as he climbed 3 little stairs up to the front of Andrew's house. And Andrew's front door had a lead glass window. I remember seeing him try to kick the door in. I didn't remember if it, kicked in or not. Later I learned it did not. But I heard 3 shots, 3 gun bullets. And so I just knew there was no way Andrew was going to survive this. So I jumped into the driver's seat of the vehicle and I escaped to a nearby supermarket store that was open 24 hours. And I walked in and I screamed, "Call 911." And, looking back, I'm sure it was just a few seconds, but it felt like minutes. Everybody was just staring at me in horror because, again, I was, pretty unrecognizable. And I looked down and there was a cell phone in my hand. So all I can figure out is I grabbed a cell phone that was in the truck. That must have been my ex-husband's. And I called 911. And I just, I don't remember if I gave the address. I don't know if I even knew the address, but I gave the name and I said, "This is what's happening. Tell the police to be careful." And from that point on, I was escorted back to a warehouse in the back of the store. And I called my parents. I didn't know if they were going to answer or not. But I did call my mom and dad. I borrowed somebody's phone and I called my mom and dad. And I tell you, when they answered the phone, it was the most beautiful sound I had heard. It was like, okay, I know they're okay. But I did let them know, hey, I'm going to be going to the hospital. I want you to hear it from me so it's not on the news.
Which you did make the news, of course.
I did make yes, I was all over the news for days. And what
happened at Andrew's house?
At Andrew's house, what ended up happening is my ex-husband shot him 10 times. It was all through the front door, but Andrew was shot in the back of his shoulder, on both shoulders. He was shot in the femoral artery in his leg, so he actually was very close to dying and probably should have died. And then he was shot 6 times in his arm. And so he collapsed and 911 came and he was taken to a hospital under an assumed name.
Maybe the answer is an angel, but how did your ex-husband not wind up killing Andrew?
I can only say it was the Lord. Now, and I don't have all the details, and Andrew doesn't remember some of the details because, when you're going through a trauma like that, your brain, everything is in slow motion but fast motion. And so I don't know all the details. I do know that Andrew at one point put himself kind of like behind tried to brace himself behind a chair. But obviously these bullets hit. And he was immediately taken into surgeries, one after the other, and it was very touch and go for a while.
So did your ex-husband, did he escape? Well, you had the car, right?
I took the vehicle, but in my fight, flight, freeze, I didn't realize I had actually kind of like driven in a circle. And so I got to a store that was just, probably 6 blocks from where Andrew's house was. So while I was in the back warehouse, being kept away from all the shoppers and they were, keeping me to the back, my ex-husband actually walked the 6 blocks or however far it was, and he got into the vehicle. And so I had a police officer that came and got me, and he said, "Ma'am, we have an ambulance that's waiting for you." And he escorted me towards the ambulance, and I said, "I need to get my cell phone out of that vehicle." So I went to the passenger side while the policeman went to the bed of the truck. And when I opened up the passenger side to get my cell phone, my ex-husband was sitting behind the driver's wheel, and he had a gun pointed at me. So at that point, I screamed. I knew I was probably going to die. I dropped to the ground, and I had a human shield of police around me just within seconds. So I was again escorted away to safety, and from that point on, my ex-husband was apprehended. I was taken to a hospital, an emergency room, and everything else began to happen.
And your ex-husband is currently in prison.
He is. He is in prison for a very long time.
A true story that happened to you.
It did.
You write in your new book, "I have chosen to focus my story not on what was done to me, but rather on what God has done in me." That's right. What has He done in you?
Oh, my goodness. There are so many things that God has done. And through this process, sometimes when tragedy and hard times hit, that's when we really fall to our knees and, we're praying more, we're seeking God more. But I discovered God's presence like I had never experienced it before. And from the very first day of my healing, I was on my face, I went to go stay at my uncle and aunt's house. They gifted me their home for the summer. And in the backyard, there was...
You did not want to spend the night, not even one more night, even though your ex-husband was in prison.
Right.
Just the trauma associated with
yes.
your home.
My home was no longer my home. So I spent the first few nights with my mom and dad. And, the first few nights, obviously, you're on very high alert. I was in a state of fear. Even though my ex-husband was in jail at that time, I didn't know if he would be able to bond out. I didn't know. There was just a lot of unknowns. But within a week, my uncle and aunt, they go to Canada for the summer. And they had a beautiful home in the south part of town. And they just said they wanted to gift me their home for the summer. And when I went there and they gave me a tour of the home, I walked in, they showed me their backyard, and there was a beautiful big pergola.
What is that?
A pergola is, it's almost like a wooden porch. There was these big beams that were like rafters, and there was 2 swings that were on chains on the side, and it was in a big cement, almost like a patio floor. And I knew when I saw it, I knew that that's where my healing was going to begin. And I think of, the story of Moses in the Bible where he saw the burning bush and he took off his sandals because he said this was holy ground. I knew this was going to be my holy ground. And I knew this is where I was going to meet Jesus face to face, although not with my physical eyes. I knew this is where I was going to encounter Jesus, and I knew this is where my healing was going to begin. But those first few days when I would lay on the cement floor of the pergola, and I would put on this, I had a big brown bathrobe and a green blanket I'd wrap myself in, and I would go out there, and I would just lay prostrate, and I just sobbed. I sobbed and I cried hour upon hour, and I remember praying and saying, Lord, I'm just asking you to sing over me because I have no words. I have no words to talk to you. I have no words to say to anybody. I am empty. And that really began the filling up. I took, and for the first few weeks, all I would do is I would listen to worship music. And I would let it wash over me. In fact, I remember that within the first week, I sent you a text message and I said, okay, there's a specific song when we were kids. And I said, and it was about God picking up the pieces to our life. And I said, I can't find it. Who sang it? And within probably a few minutes, you're like, well, that's the Imperials. And so I would just let music wash over me. And I would just weep and weep and weep.
My guest today is our very own Kimberly Haar. Kim has a new book out, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. She does tell her story in the new book, but its primary purpose is to help others who have experienced grief, loss, or trauma. When we come back, Kim, you're going to walk us through the process of reclaiming our lives. We'll both be back after this.
Oasis Roadshow.
I'm David Warren here with some exciting news for Oasis listeners. We have a new mobile device app. It's free, easy to download, and lets you enjoy our refreshing music and talk everywhere you go. If you have an Android cell phone, go to the Google Play Store. And if you have an iPhone or iPad, visit the Apple Store and search for Oasis Radio Network. Be an Oasis ambassador and share this news with family and friends around the world. Wow. We are back. David Warren here, and my guest today is our friend Kimberly Haar, who has a new book out, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. And Kim, we thank you for being so open and honest in sharing your story. What is the power in sharing one's story?
You know, David, the day everything happened, I didn't have any control over what was said and what people believed about my story. And that is the reason I decided to write a book and tell my story. I was not going to let the devil have the last word, because what the world knew was that I had been hurt. What I wanted people to know is that not only was I hurt, but that there was healing. And so coming firsthand, I know what it's like to be broken and healed, and I wanted to share that as an example for others, that they too can be healed.
Again, the name of Kim's new book, actually, I should say Kimberly Haar, because that's how it's listed in all the bookstores and online. Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts by Kimberly Haar, Haar. We're going to get to how Andrew and Kim found their way back together and got married and all that before the end of today's program. But this is your first book, Kim.
It is.
And somehow you got published on a major Christian publisher, Baker Books. Tell us about the pitch meeting, which is standard if a publisher wants to take on a new author.
You know what? It was God. I felt like David with David and Goliath, because the day I was a part of a women's writing group, and I was going to an online virtual writing group. And if you signed up early enough, you could sign up to meet with a publisher or an acquisitions editor. And so I had already decided who I was going to sign up with, who I wanted to talk to, and you got 15 minutes to really have a pitch of what you wanted them to publish. And so the day that I had set my alarm clock early, that I was going to, get online and I was going to sign up, I actually received a phone call and I received some really hard news. And I missed that deadline or that first opportunity. So the publisher I wanted to try and get an interview with, it was gone. So I saw that there was it was actually like a junior acquisitions editor. And I thought, well, it'll be good practice. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to take this interview, but I'm not thinking much about it. I just thought, okay, I'm not going to get anything. And when I went online, when it was time for the interview, because it was a Zoom process, she got on and she says, "You're an hour late." And I was in Central Time and she was Pacific Time. And so I missed my whole interview. And I remember thinking, well, Lord, it just must not be the right time. And she asked me, she said, how about if I send you a personal link next week, and I'll send it right from Baker Bookhouse. And what would have been a 15-minute interview ended up being like an hour interview. And at the end of it, she asked me, she says, "Do you have any other questions?" after we did our interview. And I said, yes, would Baker Books be interested in my book? And she gave me some tips, and she said, you know what? I'm going to do this. She says, you do this, 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 and this, change this a little bit and get it back to me by the end of the week. And I'm going to take it to this part of the publishing process. It has to go to one board, and then it goes to another board. And I got an offer back from Baker Publishing House. And a month after I got my contract with them, my acquisitions editor left. She went, and I think her husband moved, so I believe she was there at the exact time that my book needed to make that contact. So it was totally a miracle.
Well, the format of your book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts, is based on chapter 3 from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Why did you choose this, and what does Ecclesiastes 3 talk about?
Ecclesiastes is probably one of the most well-known verses that's quoted from the Bible, and it's the one that says there's a time and a season for everything. And the reason I chose that was because life is about times and seasons. And something we know about seasons is they come over and over again. And so I titled each one of my chapters as a time and a season. So my first chapter is a time to be born. The second one is a time to let go. The third one is a time to laugh. The fourth one is a time to hope, then a time to weep, a time to heal, a time to trust, a time to forgive, and a time to dance. And I added in, obviously I don't think that there is a time to forgive specifically mentioned in Ecclesiastes, but I wanted this to be that there's different times and seasons in the healing process.
Chapter 2 is called A Time to Let Go. And that's the chapter in which you write about your divorce from your now ex-husband who is in prison. That was back in 2013. And again, your divorce was based on what you called disloyalty. You had tried for many years to patch things up as a couple.
Right.
In fact, it was because of the failure of that.
Right. We had gone to marriage counseling multiple times, and I just didn't feel like we were getting what we needed. It felt like there was a Band-Aid being put on our marriage. And so early on in our marriage, I decided that I was going to go back to school to become a therapist, and I was going to learn how to give people hope because I didn't feel much hope, and I needed hope more than anything.
In the chapter about A Time to Let Go, what do you tell your clients and now your readers about timing, letting go?
You know, in timing and letting go, looking back, I had done a lot of forgiving, but I hadn't set a lot of boundaries. And I hadn't really done some healthy healing work in the relationship, when I look back now. And I had held on to our marriage for so long, and I had, I'll say I believed and I asked God to restore it and held on that I think I forgot why I was holding on. I was holding on because I had held on for so long, I didn't know what else to do. And at some point, I was watching a CNN headline it was about an orca whale. It was a headline story that was on the news, and it was about a mother whale that had given birth to a calf, which is the baby whale. And they named her, I think her name was like Tahlequah is what they named, or T3 was the name of the whale. And they watched as this mother whale, her calf was born dead or died very shortly after it had been born. And so for 17 days, CNN watched this, or they showed this story of how the mother whale would swim underneath the calf because she would carry the calf on her back. And she would swim, and when the baby calf would fall off, she would swim under, get that calf back up, and bring it back up to the surface. And CNN named this a tour of grief. It was 17 days, and after 17 days and like 1,000 miles, this mama whale finally decided to let the calf go. And when I saw that, I realized that I had been in a tour of grief. I had been grieving my marriage for a very long time. What was, what wasn't, what I wanted it to be, what it would never be. And so I finally came to that decision of it was time I had to let go to move forward.
Chapter 4 is entitled A Time to Hope. And hope has become a very large part of your life. In fact, your therapy, your counseling is at a place called There's Hope Counseling.
Right.
And we've talked a lot about There's Hope Counseling throughout the years. One great quote from your book, you say, let your hopes, not your hurts, shape your future.
Mm-hmm. When we get hurt, we have to make a choice that we're not going to let our hurts define us. It is looking at, well, how do I move forward? And I like to use the saying, rather than getting stuck in the why me, it's more about looking at what now, what's next. And David, the day that I was in the emergency room, later I connected with the detective that had been in the emergency room with me about a year after the incident had happened. And she said, Kim, do you remember what you said to me that first day when you were in the emergency room? She had been training a new detective, and she said, I had never heard anybody say this. Or have this attitude. She said, but you looked at me and you said, I will not let this experience go to waste. I will be a better therapist because of it. Later, my daughter said, Mom, do you remember what you said to me in the emergency room? Only one of my children, was able to come to the emergency room. She goes, but do you remember what you told me as you looked at me? And I said, no, I don't remember much about that day. And she said, Mom, you looked at me and you said, promise me you won't let this make you bitter. And I remember on that very day, I made a choice. And I made a choice that says, I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what it's all going to entail. But I am making a choice that I am going to heal. And that really was the beginning of the healing before the healing even began.
Before we tell people how they can get your new book, whom did you have in mind when you wrote your book? Because, of course, you wanted to tell your story and basically say, trust me, if you're going through grief, loss, or trauma, I have been where you are. So tell us about your target audience for this book.
Sure. My target audience is probably, I wrote for specifically the Christian woman. That is probably between the ages of 35, 65. Now, it can be different ages, but that's my target audience who has gone through deep loss, hurt, and trauma. And in my introduction, I actually say that I feel like I know the reader. I say, I feel like I've seen you. I've seen you in the eyes of the woman that came into my office as with me being a therapist. I feel like I've seen them as they've come in and they talk about a betrayal and a loss. I feel like I've seen them in the eyes of the widow who's now facing, how do I create a new life alone? I've seen them in the eyes of the woman whose dad left when she was young and she wonders, why wasn't I enough to make him stay? But I end that introduction by saying, and I've seen you in the eyes of the woman in the mirror, because that woman is me, and I'm no different. And I think it's easy for us to get into this idea of pain Olympics and say, well, what happened to me is not as bad as what happened to somebody else. And there are no pain Olympics. Pain is pain. I've known loss, someone else has known loss. I've known hurt, somebody else has known hurt. And so I wanted to level that playing field and say, you know what? It's more about we've all been hurt. We've all been hurt. Now, how can we all make a choice to heal?
Tell us the name of your brand new book.
All right, the name of my book is Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. And then the subtitle is Reclaiming Your Life After Grief, Loss, or Trauma.
And you have a special website for this book.
I do. You can either go to my website, KimberlyHaar.com, and there is a special tab that says book, or you can go to healingfromlifesdeepesthurtsbook.com, and you can access some resources there. You can access information about the book. And on both of those, I even have a video where I share for about 2 or 3 minutes just about the book and about the healing process.
All right, and the book is out wherever books are sold. And when we come back, I want to ask about the process of recording it for Audible, because you read your new book.
I did.
All right, again, the website, KimberlyHaar.com. Haar is spelled Haar.com. She obviously got married to Andrew because we talk about him each time we're together from the Hardy Har story vault there. But you were in the hospital. He was in the hospital after having been shot how many times?
Right. He was shot 10 times.
10 times. So you guys were still, quote, dating. I'm sure that put a kink into the dating process, but somehow you two wound up back together. And we're going to hear that story after this.
I'm Karen Jensen Salisbury, one of the hosts you hear on the Oasis Network Roadshow. For 35 years, this 1 hour of the day has inspired and motivated you, our listeners, with thousands of stories of people whose lives demonstrate the truth that with God, all things are possible. It's an hour that you should make a part of your day, Monday through Friday, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Central. The Roadshow, an Oasis Network presentation.
On today's program, we are celebrating our friend Kimberly Haar's brand new book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts, available wherever books are sold. And Haar, by the way, is spelled Haar. And Kim, there's also an audiobook, which you read. I love it when people read their own books. It's available on audible.com. Again, today's guest and the author, Kimberly Haar, Haar. Did you, well, after all of this roadshow experience, it must have been a breeze to record your book.
Well, you know what? They did say I made their job very easy, and they said I was better than most professionals. But the funny thing, when I got there, it was a big, beautiful studio in Dallas, Texas. And they were telling me about this is where Vanilla Ice had recorded a 7-time platinum album, and Ted Nugent and Blake Shelton. And they're going through all these names. And I'm thinking, I'd be more impressed if you said like Bill Gaither or, or, and I thought, well, now you can tell them that Kim Haar was here.
I love it. Okay, so you have tools for growth and healing as part of your new book.
I do.
Again, the name of the book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. Tell us about these tools for growth and healing and why you included these.
Sure. I didn't want to just tell my story. So my book is half my story. And in the second section, I talk about tools that not only do I use with my own therapy clients, but they're ones that I used in my healing. And they include everything from the power of friendship, which is when trauma or loss happens, it's normal for us to want to pull back and to isolate. So I talk about the importance of not isolating. There's the power of self-care, which includes like rest, the power of journaling, the power of therapy, the power of gratitude, the power of forgiveness, the power of music, the power of place, the power of self-talk, and the power of prayer. And each one of those are vital in our healing.
And they sound a whole lot like our therapy topics each month.
They do. See, you didn't know it, but I've actually been drawing on some of those when we've done our talks.
Well, why not?
Yes.
You wrote it. Why not make a book, which you have? And
That's
congratulations, by the way. I want to make sure I say that. Okay, so I would like for you to read from Chapter 8. This is a time to forgive, and you're writing about forgiving your ex-husband after having assaulted you and your then-boyfriend, Andrew Haar. And so if you would read to us.
Sure. This subtitle says, Forgiving Him. Throughout our 23 years of marriage, forgiving my husband was a regular part of my life. Despite his recurring lies and betrayals, I held on to hope, fueled by an enduring love and a belief in his potential to change. However, the painful reality of his continued behavior eventually gave me the courage to step away from our toxic relationship. On the tragic morning of my assault, my ex-husband faced the consequences of his actions as he looked down into my now bloodied face. As his intoxication began to wear off, the gravity of what he had just done started to sink in. Meeting my gaze, he spoke with a weighty sense of resignation, acknowledging the irreparable damage he had caused. Tell me, I've gone too far this time. We could never go back. You could never forgive me, he said. With little to no hesitation, a clear mind, and all sincerity, I solemnly responded, You're right. You've gone too far this time. We can never go back. But I want you to know that I do and will forgive you. These words, spoken during pain and suffering, would be some of the final words I would ever speak to him. On the day my ex-husband assaulted me and tried to kill Andrew, the police arrested him and took him to jail. As darkness fell that night, I found myself praying for my ex-husband. I prayed that he wouldn't feel alone or frightened in his jail cell. I prayed that he would somehow sense the presence of God with him. And in that moment, I realized that I truly meant every word I was praying. I can't say I understand why my ex-husband did what he did to Andrew and me, and nothing would ever excuse his actions. I have, however, come to understand the saying that hurt people hurt people. By forgiving my ex-husband, I did not absolve him of his wrongdoing. Rather, the choice to forgive him was rooted in my own healing journey. My decision enabled me to release the burden of bitterness and resentment that threatened to consume me. While forgiveness does not erase the memories of my pain, it provides me the freedom to move forward with grace and resilience. In that moment, I forgave my ex-husband, but I knew I would have to remind myself to forgive him each time the pain resurfaced. When memories of the hurt emerge, I reaffirm my decision to forgive. This continual act of forgiveness allows me to reclaim my peace and strength and ensures that my past does not dictate my future. Since that time, my prayer has not changed. I continue to pray that my ex-husband finds healing in his life as he serves out his prison sentence and allows God, who loves him every bit as much as he loves me, to become very real to him in the days, months, and years ahead.
Beautifully written. We talked earlier about you meeting your now husband, Andrew Haar, and, he had to have his own time to forgive regarding your ex-husband. He had no past with this man.
That's right.
And all he knew is that one day Andrew, shows up to his door and gets shot multiple times.
Right.
How did his healing process go?
Andrew, I can just say there's just such a gift with this man in that in the 8 years that it has been, it's almost been 8 years now, Andrew has never said a bad word about my ex-husband. There was one time he called him a doofus, but my husband now, Andrew Haar, is a walking example of not holding on, because his attitude from the very beginning, too, was if I'm angry and resentful and bitter, I'm looking back. And it's more, he wanted to move forward, and we did. When we reconnected, actually, I didn't hear from Andrew for almost 6 weeks.
Were you in 2 different hospitals?
We were in 2 different hospitals. He was under an assumed name. I think it was like maybe John Doe, because it was a crime scene. So I couldn't find him. And his adult children, I had not met 2 of them. He has 3 adult children. So they took my phone number out of his phone. And they called my phone, which my daughter answered the day I was in the emergency room. And they said, we just think it would be better if our parents go their separate ways. And I did have contact with Andrew's assistant from work, and she said the first day he had said he loved me and he wanted to be with me. But then she told me as the week progressed, as 2 weeks progressed, he had made the decision it was better if we went separate ways. And my heart it sank. And so I just waited because I wanted to give him the time. He was in and out of surgeries. And I was at the pergola one day and I heard I think it wasn't even a ding because it was through Facebook Messenger. I get this little message and it's from Andrew and it says, "Hey, I'm alive." And I said, "Can I come see you?" And he said, "I don't know." And he said he was going in for another surgery, and he said, "I'll contact you after the surgery is done, and we'll go from there." And so I waited another 3 days, and he kept ending these messages with the words, "Take care." And I'm thinking, what does that mean? Does that mean take care, I'll never see you again? So it was a real struggle for me. And I think it was the end of maybe it was 6 weeks about, he contacted me and he said, "Okay, come to the hospital, but come when my kids aren't here." So here I am, a 50-year-old woman. We're 50-year-olds and we're sneaking around our adult kids. And I walked into his hospital room and I looked at him and I said, "Andrew, where does this leave us?" And he said, "I don't know." He said, "I have seen the 17 felony counts against your ex-husband and what he did to you." And he goes, "You're going to be messed up." And he said, "I know what he did to me, and I'm going to be messed up." And I looked at him. I didn't let him say anything else. I shook my finger in his face, and I said, "Andrew Haar, you will never meet another woman like me." And 4 weeks later, we were engaged, and 4 months later, we were married.
You know what? I am not crazy about going to weddings. It's just not something I enjoy doing. But when I was invited to your wedding, it was something that I would never have missed. Chapter 9 of your new book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts, is called A Time to Dance.
Yes.
Is that the end of the journey after somebody has gone through grief, loss, or trauma?
You know, when I did the chapter A Time to Dance, no, it really isn't. Because there's a last kind of like an epilogue that says A Time to Move On, where you look back and I'm kind of saying, these are the things I've learned. And one of those is that seasons come again and again. Now, I don't expect to go through anything like that again. But you know what? Even since that time, I've gone through hard things. But the time to dance was really more about staying with your first love, staying with as on fire for the Lord and surrendering to the Lord. And when I was at the pergola, I didn't feel much like worshiping the Lord those first few weeks. I didn't feel much like anything. I didn't want to trust him. I was scared. If I trusted God, what if I didn't get what I wanted? And so I told the Lord, I said, as a sacrifice of my praise, I'm going to give you a dance of surrender. And I put on a song that the Oasis Network actually has played it many times before by Paul Wilbur called Dance With Me, O Lover of My Soul. And I would close my eyes, I would put myself in a waltz position, and I would dance to that song, and I would imagine God's arms around me. And at the very end of that dance, I would bow and I would curtsy, and as if it was a reverence to the Lord. And so a time to dance starts with me going back on my wedding day. I called my uncle and aunt who were home by now, and I said, close the curtains. If there's a noise, don't call the police. It's just me. And I went back and I said, Lord, I want to always keep you as my first love, and the things that I had really learned that summer. So I started that day with a dance with the Lord to my audience of one. And it ends with my wedding day dance with Andrew as we are beginning our married life.
Okay, I'm trying not to cry after that story, but I love it, and I love you.
I love you, David.
Healing from life's deepest hurts. Reclaiming your life after grief, loss, or trauma. By Kimberly Haar. More information is available on the website kimberlyhaar.com. Haar is spelled Haar.com, and yes, we will return to Hardy Har stories in the future, but today's been very, very special. The book is available wherever books are sold, and also it is voiced by, right here, Kim Haar, on Audible. I should be saying Kimberly Haar because that's how you'll find it. Kimberly Haar, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. We're going to take a break. I'm going to clean up a little bit, and we'll have some final words and thoughts from our very special guest, our friend, Kimberly Haar. Back after this. I'm David Warren, Program Director at Oasis Radio Network and one of the hosts of this podcast. All of our hosts enjoy hearing from you, our listening family, so drop us a note. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and you'll receive new episodes on your mobile devices. And now, back to the show. Okay. Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. Congratulations on this new book, Kim.
Thank you.
I was there when it happened. Well, I wasn't there, but I mean, I was there in your life.
Yes.
I don't even remember. Did we cancel a Roadshow taping that month?
I sent you my pictures and I said, this is my absence, my excuse. I have to cancel the Roadshow this month. And the very next month I was on again.
Yes, you were. And you know, with the lightheartedness and the joy that you bring to this program whenever you're on, people would have never thought you went through something like you have described on today's program. And I think of different people in my life, and I want you to just talk to the people I'm thinking of and all the people that are listening to this that either are or know somebody who is suffering from grief, loss, or trauma, and just give some final words of encouragement, if you would.
Sure. I think the most important thing is when you're walking through life's deepest pain, run to God, not away from Him. Because that's where God meets us in our pain. He doesn't abandon us. And everybody heals at a different pace. So don't let anybody guilt you into you should be over something by now. But the most important thing is that you are healing, that you're making progress, even if it's small steps. So in those small steps, reach out to community, reach out to trusted friends. My first month, I have text messages from you, David, and your messages were, you're going to be better than ever. It was, hey, I was thinking about you and I said a prayer for you. And so surround yourself, because the enemy wants to isolate you and he wants to feed you lies that you're alone and that God doesn't care. And that's the farthest thing from the truth, is let people be the hands and feet of Jesus to you and take it one step at a time, but you will heal.
I think whenever you tell stories about Andrew and you in the future now, it will have a whole new meaning for our listening family. They'll know what you two have been through.
We
And that
treasure
you did
each day.
not only find each other, but you kept each other.
Yeah. Well, Jesus kept us. But yes, I wouldn't let Andrew get rid of me.
Well, congratulations once again on the new book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts, Reclaiming Your Life After Grief, Loss, or Trauma by Kimberly Haar. Mm-hmm. And this is out wherever books are sold. You've been playing with your phone. Oh, she's putting the phone on me. What is this we're doing here?
I'm recording this because this is my first interview.
Okay. Well,
This is real.
first interview on the book. KimberlyHaar.com for more information on the book, Haar. The book is out wherever books are sold. Audible.com. The website for your therapy is there'shopehere.com. There'shopehere.com. Stay tuned to the Roadshow. Many more programs with Kim Haar and David Warren to come. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you again. I need to rest after this, Kim.
Me too.
I'm David Warren.
And I'm Kim Haar.
And it's been, and do we mean it today,
Another great Roadshow.
You've been listening to The Roadshow. If you'd like to write to us, here's our address. The Roadshow, P.O. Box 1924, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74101. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. The views of today's guest aren't necessarily those of this station, but we do appreciate and thank our guest for spending this time with us. The Roadshow, an Oasis Network presentation.